August 11th, 1918. Telegram to the Bolshevik Party leaders in the Penza region. Comrades, the peasant uprising in your 5 areas must be put down. Show no mercy. I leave it to you to ensure that the population for hundreds of miles around witness, tremble, understand, and pass on the message. The Bolsheviks kill and will continue to kill all bloodthirsty kulaks. Telegraph that this message has been received and carry out the orders contained therein. Your Lenin. P.S. Find more ruthless people. The author of this terrifying telegram is a key figure in world history, Lenin. In his name, millions of people rose to change the world and millions died. Access to archives and the testimonies of surviving witnesses who have consented to talk to us have enabled us to put together a portrait of the father of the Russian Revolution, a portrait that turns the myth upside down. To expose Lenin is to reveal the century, its ambitions, utopias, illusions, and barbarity in the name of ideology. It all began in Simbirsk, a small provincial town deep in the heart of Russia, on the banks of the Volga, 700 kilometers from Moscow. Such was the birthplace of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, the future Lenin, born on April the 20th, 1870. They were a comfortably off, closely knit family with 6 children, very far from the proletarian image found in official biographies. Lenin had Russian ancestors, but what has been hidden until now was the fact that he also had Mongol, German, Jewish, and Swedish blood. We find no less than 7 different Ulyanov family homes in Simbirsk as they moved with each new arrival. The Ulyanovs spent summers in their country house in Kukushkino, a region given over to holiday homes for provincial dignitaries. They spent their time walking or reading together. The father, Ilya Nikolaevich, was an important civil servant, eventually titled for his services, who had appearances to keep up.
It was a fairly high-ranking job. Head schools inspector for the whole province was an important position. He mixed with the higher society in the area of Simbirsk. The family had to keep up a certain lifestyle. Ilya Nikolaevich entertained colleagues and pupils. And we also know from documents dating from the time that he entertained churchmen. He had many relations through his job as head schools inspector and headmaster. It can be said that he mixed with a very wide variety of people.
Nothing in Vladimir Ulyanov's early life gives any inkling of what he was to become. He was a well-educated, bright student. The family was a fairly pious one. And despite official records which state that there was revolutionary activity in Simbirsk, there was none. Olga Ulyanova is Lenin's niece. She is the daughter of Dmitry, his youngest brother, and is Lenin's only surviving relative.
This photo is from 1922, which is the year I was born. Here's my mother, Alexandra Fyodorovna, with me on her lap, and Vladimir Ilyich, and Viktor Ulyanov. The Ulyanov children were very well read. They had access to all sorts of scientific and political works. But I must say that their father never preached revolutionary ideas. He was never involved in politics. He never encouraged anyone to rebel.
When Vladimir was 16, his father died. The following year, in 1887, a thunderbolt ripped into his life. His older brother Alexander was arrested in St. Petersburg for plotting an assassination attempt against the Tsar. Alexander was condemned to death, and on May the 8th, 1887, he was hung with 5 of his co-conspirators in the sinister Schlieselberg fortress on the banks of the Neva, near St. Petersburg.
Alexander Ulyanov's execution had a profound effect on the young Vladimir Ilyich. As the historian Valentinov has pointed out, the world would never have heard of Lenin if Alexander had not been executed.
Outraged by the death of his brother, Vladimir became a revolutionary. He was arrested, imprisoned, and then exiled for 2 years to Chuchenskoye in Siberia. And it was there he married Krupskaya, a militant socialist. In 1900, Vladimir Ulyanov left his motherland and was to remain abroad for the following 17 years. He took the name of Lenin and settled first of all in Geneva in Switzerland, where the large majority of Russian revolutionaries were in exile. He spent his time agitating for the Russian Social Democrat Party. It was at this time that he formulated his doctrine: refusal of democracy, dictatorship of the proletariat, with his party as the vanguard of the revolution. He published his intentions and declaimed at conferences and seminars without the least interference from the authorities. His police file has been kept in Bern. He appears as a law-abiding émigré who respected the laws of his host country. The file is thin indeed.
There isn't very much on Lenin because, at the time, he wasn't very well known. And we've always wondered at the way Bolshevik activity in Switzerland appears to have been so little monitored by the authorities. We find that extremely interesting. From what I've heard from those who knew him, Lenin had an unshakable faith in what he believed, and faith in the possibility of changing his country, the regime in his country. This faith rather frightened his Swiss comrades who didn't have, let's say, his fanatical conviction that revolution in Russia and in Germany could be brought about. His authoritarian tendencies were very strong when it came to imposing his views.
In his articles and pamphlets printed in Switzerland, there is no question of a democratic revolution. This is made clear time and time again. He was in opposition to the majority of the Russian Social Democrats, and in particular the Mensheviks, led by Martov. Martov's niece, Tamara Popova, remembers.
My uncle Martov was a man of principle, and he thought Lenin was a rogue. Lenin always tried to talk down to people. Martov was a real Democrat, a true Democrat. He considered that each and every man and woman was entitled to their own opinion, that everyone had the right to say what they thought. That wasn't Lenin's way. For him, the decisions taken by the Central Committee were not open to discussion. Everyone had to fall in line with them.
But the situation was evolving in Russia, and a popular spontaneous revolution broke out in 1905 as rebellious sailors hoisted the red flag on the battleship Potemkin. The noble exile Lenin was skeptical of this revolution as it drew on and on, waiting until the autumn to return to his country. In January 1906, the Tsar finally put down the revolution in a bloody repression. The violence of the aftermath and the sting of defeat were so intense that even the most hardened revolutionary's faith was shaken. Such was the impetus to Lenin's stroke of genius. Revolution cannot be achieved through the people. It was a job for the professionals. He returned immediately to Europe to set up a school for revolutionaries in Longjumeau, in the suburbs of Paris in France. The premises have not changed.
Lenin's school was over there at the back. It was a locksmith's and ironworker's workshop. Still is, that's what's funny. They had escape routes out the back in case of police raids. There were 2 emergency exits. Wherever he went, it was always safety first.
Auguste Gillot used to come and play in this courtyard in those years. He knew the yard owner, who rented the premises to Lenin.
It was a very complicated business to bring men over from Moscow or Leningrad, St. Petersburg at the time, of course. Never mind from the Russian countryside. But they did it. When you look at the militants who were at the school here, you're looking at several members of Lenin's first government in 1917. It's incredible, but it's right here that they were trained.
The current owner of the premises is the great-grandson of Lenin's landlord. His name is Léon Duchamp.
He told me they had a school here. He'd see them come and go in the morning, in the evening, you know, that kind of thing. That's where the school was, but what sort of school it was, I couldn't say. Maybe a school of revolution. My grandfather didn't go into detail.
A school of revolution it was. Lessons concerned Marxism, propaganda methods, and the rules of underground activity. This school was the first of its kind in world history, teaching revolutionary struggle in a methodological and professional context.
It was crafty, all that, when you think about it. Yes, they were all there, first floor, several of them to a room.
Among the 14 students were the future leaders of the revolution. After a 2-month course, they returned to Russia to launch the ferment of dissent. Lenin followed, but as an exile, he was obliged to set up here in Krakow, in Austrian Poland, just near the Russian border. This was an important turning point in Lenin's life, both political and private. In fact, he fell in love. In Poland, he rented a house in the Tatras and took long mountain walks with his wife Krupskaya and Ines Armand, a long-standing militant Bolshevik. The friendship he felt towards the young woman gradually became love. Lenin's affair with Ines Armand remains secret for over 80 years. From party archives, we've filmed 2 documents that prove their liaison. Firstly, a letter written in Paris. "The pain of our separation is hard for me to bear, my darling. I hadn't yet fallen in love with you in Paris. If only I could see you, just see you, I wouldn't need even to kiss you." In her diary, at the end of her life, she wrote, "I have feelings left only for my children and for Vladimir Ilyich."
Krupskaya knew exactly what was going on. One could call it a love triangle. They were in love. Everyone knows that today. We know today that there was talk of divorce between Lenin and Krupskaya. Krupskaya offered to divorce Lenin. That was just after the October Revolution, but Lenin refused.
In August 1914, Europe exploded as the First World War broke out. On August the 7th, Lenin was arrested in Poland, accused of spying for the Russians. Stanislas Sieska is 100 years old. He was in Nowy Targ prison with Lenin.
Lenin.
Lenin. Oh yes, I knew him. Lenin was in prison with me, but I was still a boy, you know, a little boy. I was a cowherd for a farmer in Kopienic, and when the war broke out, the forests were razed to the ground, and what was left had to be burned too. I had started a fire just for fun, and they locked me up. I was in prison in 1914. I was 16 and coming up to the end of school. I was in a cell in Nowy Targ, and he was in Nowy Targ too. There was another one with him. Because I was a kid, I got a bit of extra food, just a few ounces more. It wasn't enough. And the woman, the secretary or the wife who came to see him, she sometimes gave me, well, she gave me a piece of bread. I stayed in prison 5 weeks. Lenin stayed less time.
Between 1914 and 1916, the Russians suffered defeat after defeat. But in Russia, as in France and Germany, the revolutionary leaders had accepted the war for patriotic reasons. Lenin alone hoped for a Russian defeat. He saw that such a defeat, in weakening Russia, would strengthen his chances of launching the revolution. But he had little faith in the real possibility.
In January 1917, in a speech given in Switzerland, he said that he saw no imminent opportunities for revolution. He didn't say it outright, but he did say, "We old Bolsheviks probably won't live long enough to see the revolution." And when it happened, he was astonished.